The museum's storage room was not a place most people visited twice. Dust hung in the air like ancient spirits, and the scent of paper, stone, and forgotten wood lingered with an oppressive heaviness. Yet to Elena Vargas this was sacred ground. She moved between rows of metal shelving with the practiced silence of someone who had made herself invisible long ago. The others barely noticed her, just the quiet archivist, who worked alone among relics no one else cared about. It was a Tuesday afternoon, grey and unremarkable, when she found it. An unmarked crate wedged between shipping pallets, its wood darkened by decades. The stenciled lettering was faded beyond recognition. Something about its isolation struck her as odd. It looked like it hadn't been moved since long before she joined the museum. She knelt, brushing her fingers along the lid, feeling the ridges and splinters. The latch was rusted but gave way under gentle pressure. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed cloth, lay a stone tablet. Its surface was etched, with lines so intricate and deliberate that even at first glance she recognized the craftsmanship. Symbols, not random scratches, flowed across the face in winding rows. Mayan, there was no mistaking it. The curves, the loops, the distinct, blocky structure of the glyphs. And yet, something was different. They weren't arranged like the ceremonial texts she'd seen in academic reproductions. This was tighter, more compressed, as if hiding meaning within meaning. Elena's pulse quickened. She remembered her grandfather's voice, low and patient, teaching her to recognize the signs by the light of a single oil lamp in their Guatemalan home. Those evenings had been their secret. Lessons not from books, but from the stories passed down through generations. She'd thought that knowledge would remain nothing more than a childhood curiosity, irrelevant in her life now, but here it was, calling to her from stone. She reached for her phone to photograph the tablet, her hands trembling slightly. That was when the sound of heavy footsteps broke her concentration. "Vargas!" came a sharp voice. She turned to see Dr. Miles Harper, the museum's head curator, filling the doorway. He was a tall man with a meticulously trimmed beard and the kind of polished confidence that made him sound authoritative, even when wrong. "What are you doing with that?" "I found it in storage," Elena replied softly, instinctively moving her body between him and the crate. "It's not in the catalogue. I think it's probably a fake," Harper cut in, stepping closer to peer over her shoulder. His tone dripped with the casual dismissal she'd come to expect from him. "We've had dozens of these come through, tourist junk from the 50s. Elena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing with him only made him more determined to belittle her. Still, she couldn't let go of the certainty rising in her chest. "I'd like to run a proper analysis," she said instead. He smirked. "Don't waste your time. I'll have it logged for deaccession." With that, he turned to leave, already tapping on his phone. Elena watched him go, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't let this artifact vanish into some auction house or storage facility where it would be lost forever. Not when the symbols on its surface were whispering secrets meant only for those who could hear. A voice in her mind, her grandfather's again, urged her to act. She carefully slid the tablet back into the crate, closed the lid, and noted its original position among the shelves. If she played this carefully, she could study it without Harper noticing. She would need patience, discretion, and a willingness to risk her position. As she turned off the storage room light, the glyphs still glowed in her mind, burning with a message she didn't yet understand. But she would. She had no doubt. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Miles Harper's life. Outside, the museum's polished marble floors gleamed in the afternoon light. Harper walked briskly toward his office, already plotting his next acquisition. He didn't notice Elena lingering in the shadows, watching him with quiet resolve. Somewhere deep inside the museum's forgotten shelves, an ancient voice waited for her to listen. And she would. The next morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual, the echo of her footsteps chasing her through the empty marble corridors. She had barely slept, her mind turning over the lines and curves of the glyphs, replaying each detail she had memorized. The tablet's symbols had a rhythm, an almost musical flow, like a chant carved in stone. She was halfway down the hallway to the archives when she heard him, Dr. Harper's voice, smooth yet laced with condescension, filtering out of the conservation lab. Just a piece of mid-century fakery, he was telling one of the junior curators. Stone's too clean, no erosion patterns. Probably some craftsman trying to pass it off as genuine. I'll send it to storage until we can offload it. Elena felt a familiar burn in her chest. She stepped inside, feigning casual interest. "Morning, Dr. Harper. I thought you were cataloguing new acquisitions today." "I am," he said, giving her a quick glance before returning to his clipboard. "This thing isn't worth the effort." He gestured toward the crate, now sitting on a rolling cart, the tablet hidden beneath its cloth. "I'll be handling the paperwork." "I could take it off your hands," she offered. "At least give it a preliminary assessment before it goes anywhere." He chuckled without looking up. What would you find that I haven't? You're an archivist, Vargas, not a field archaeologist. You organize boxes, leave the analysis to the experts." The words stung more than she let show. She forced a neutral smile. Understood. Inside, though, her thoughts were sharp as obsidian. Experts. That word always seemed to mean men like him, loud, confident, dismissive of those who didn't match their polished image. She turned on her heel and left before he could see the defiance in her eyes. Back in the solitude of her workroom, she allowed herself a slow breath. She had spent years being overlooked, and in that time she had learned how to work unseen. If Harper wanted to underestimate her, she would make that her advantage. That afternoon, she slipped back into the conservation lab under the pretense of delivering some inventory forms. The cart with the crate was still there, pushed into a corner. She lingered just long enough to lift the cloth for a brief glance at the tablet, committing the next set of glyphs to memory. Her mind drifted back to the humid evenings of her childhood in Guatemala, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on her grandfather's lined face. He had been a schoolteacher by day, but at night he became her guide to the language of their ancestors. "Each symbol is a story," he had said once, tracing a carved spiral with his fingertip. "The trick is to hear the story, not just read the marks." Even then, she had sensed that what he was teaching her wasn't meant for classrooms or museums. It was meant for someone who would carry the old voices forward. By the time the museum closed, she had memorized nearly half of the tablet's inscription, piecing together fragments of meaning. One phrase kept emerging, a reference to the Sky Serpent, a creature she vaguely remembered from Mayan legends, often associated with gods and celestial movements. She was packing up to leave when Harper strode past her workroom. "Vargas," he said, pausing at the door, "don't spend too much time on that rock. It's not worth your energy." She smiled faintly, her voice steady. "Of course, Dr. Harper." But as he walked away, she let the smile fade. He didn't know that every word, every line of his dismissal only strengthened her resolve. The tablet wasn't just worth her energy, it might be the most important discovery of her life. and she was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be her hands, not his, that brought it into the light. The rain came suddenly that night, hammering against Elena's apartment windows with a tropical urgency that reminded her of home. She sat at her small kitchen table, the lamplight casting a soft halo over the notepad in front of her. The symbols she'd memorized from the tablet filled the page in careful sketches, each curve and angle recreated from the vault of her memory. Her pen paused as her mind drifted back to the Guatemalan village of her childhood. Dirt roads winding between bright painted houses, the hum of cicadas in the evening air. She could almost hear the creak of her grandfather's wooden chair on the veranda, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. He had been a quiet man, but when he spoke about their heritage, his voice carried a weight that made her lean forward, hanging on every word. Our ancestors hid truths in plain sight, he had told her, pulling a worn leather-bound book from a locked cabinet. Not for fear, but to ensure only the patient and the worthy could uncover them. He had shown her pages of glyphs, some similar to the ones now etched into the tablet, others more elaborate, wrapped around drawings of temples and celestial charts. He had taught her the basics of translation, the way a single curve could change the meaning of a word, how the positioning of symbols altered entire sentences. But there were deeper layers, he said, layers only revealed when one understood the myths that wrapped themselves around the language like vines around stone. Those lessons had ended abruptly. She remembered the day vividly. Soldiers in the village beat, their sharp voices cutting through the humid air. Her grandfather's sudden decision to send her to live with her mother in the city. The book was locked away again, and she never saw it after that. A knock at her apartment door snapped her back to the present. It was Rosa, her neighbor, holding out a steaming bowl of sopa de pollo. "You've been working late again," Rosa said with a knowing look. "Don't forget to eat." Elena smiled in thanks, though her mind was still tangled in symbols. As soon as Rosa left, she returned to the sketches, tracing a particular sequence that had been troubling her. It seemed to reference a place, something about the dwelling where the serpent greets the sun. The serpent. Again? She reached for her laptop, cross-referencing Mayan myths online, but she quickly realized the phrasing didn't match any documented legend she could find, which meant it might be part of a local or even lost variation, preserved only in oral tradition, or hidden away on this tablet. The next morning, Harper was waiting for her at the archives. "Vargas," he said, his tone clipped. "I've moved the stone piece to secure storage. No need for you to handle it further." Her stomach tightened. "Secure storage?" "Standard procedure," he said, clearly enjoying the flicker of frustration that crossed her face. "I'll notify you if it becomes relevant." He turned away before she could respond, but the decision had already solidified in her mind. She couldn't let the tablet slip from her reach. If that meant bending museum protocol, so be it. That afternoon, she found the key she needed, literally in the form of a forgotten copy of the storage room's access card, tucked into a desk drawer from a retired archivist's belongings. She slipped it into her pocket, her pulse quickening. As the museum lights dimmed at closing time, she stood in the shadowed corridor outside secure storage, listening for footsteps. The silence was thick. She swiped the card, the lock clicked open. Inside, the crate sat on a low shelf, unmarked and unassuming, as though it were just another forgotten relic among thousands. Elena knelt beside it, lifting the cloth. Her fingers brushed the tablet's cool surface. This time, she began to read in earnest, letting her eyes follow the trail of glyphs, as if hearing her grandfather's voice beside her. The symbols were no longer static, they were alive, moving her toward something vast and hidden. And for the first time, she understood. This was no ceremonial artifact. It was a map. The realization struck her like a physical blow. A map. Not of any territory she recognized, but of something older, more elusive. The glyphs didn't just tell a story, they gave directions, framed in metaphors only someone steeped in Mayan cosmology could decipher. Elena leaned closer, tracing a series of spirals and jagged lines that seemed to chart rivers and mountain ridges, but they were overlaid with celestial markers, constellations in the shape of serpents, a sun disk intersected by a zigzag that mirrored the Milky Way's path across the sky. Her grandfather's lessons rose in her mind. "The heavens guide the earth," he had said. "If you want to find the temple, you must follow both." Halfway through the inscription, she froze. The symbols suddenly broke from their rhythmic flow into a phrase so stark it was almost chilling. "Where the serpent drinks the morning sun, the gate shall open." She mouthed the words silently, feeling the weight of each one. It wasn't just poetic, it was locational. The serpent, she guessed, was a mountain ridge shaped like the creature. The morning sun suggested an eastern-facing slope. And the gate? She could only imagine. A creak behind her made her heart lurch. She turned, half expecting Harper's shadow in the doorway. But the corridor remained empty, the silence deep. Still, she knew she was running out of time. She photographed the entire tablet, working fast but careful not to blur the details. When she was done, she covered it again, returned the crate exactly as she'd found it, and slipped out of storage. The next day, Harper called a staff meeting. Elena sat at the far end of the long oak table, her notes hidden in a manila folder on her lap. Harper stood at the head, smiling in that self-satisfied way she'd come to dread. "I'll be giving a short lecture next month on recent acquisitions," he announced, "including a rather intriguing Mayan-style tablet we've recovered. Still in authentication, of course, but I'll share some preliminary thoughts." Elena's stomach turned. Preliminary thoughts? He hadn't spent more than 2 minutes looking at the tablet. He was going to parade it in front of donors and scholars, taking credit for its discovery. After the meeting, she caught him in the hallway. "Dr. Harper, about the tablet—" He cut her off. "Vargas, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're out of your depth. This isn't a puzzle you can solve with bedtime stories from your grandfather. Let the professionals handle it." Her jaw clenched, but she kept her voice even. "And if the professionals are wrong?" He smirked. "Then they'll still have a better guess than you." That night, back at her apartment, Elena spread out the photos on her kitchen table. She began aligning them with old maps of Guatemala, tracing routes through dense jungles, cross-referencing with astronomical charts. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. There was a location that fit, remote, uncharted, a jagged ridge that locals sometimes called La Serpiente del Amanecer, the serpent of the dawn. And just below it, hidden under a dense canopy, satellite images hinted at unnatural geometry, straight lines that nature didn't make. Her pulse pounded. This was it. The Temple of the Sky Serpent wasn't just a legend, it was real, and Harper would never see it coming. The morning after her discovery, Eleanor arrived at the museum with a fire in her veins. She had barely slept, her mind consumed with the map's coordinates and the thought of what lay beneath that jungle canopy. She planned to spend the day quietly gathering resources, old field reports, expedition logs, any scraps of data that could confirm her theory without drawing Harper's attention. But Harper was already waiting for her in the archives, leaning casually against the doorway. "Vargas," he said, his tone dripping with feigned warmth. "I've decided to bring the tablet into my office for further study. Can't risk it getting misplaced." Her gut twisted. "I thought it was going to secure storage." "I changed my mind," he replied, giving her a thin smile. "Some of the glyphs are interesting. I might include them in a journal submission, with proper interpretation, of course." She recognized the subtext instantly. My interpretation, my credit. "Of course," she said, hiding her reaction, but the moment he walked away carrying the crate, she knew he was on to something. Maybe he'd noticed her interest, or maybe his ambition simply couldn't let go of anything potentially valuable. Either way, the danger was real now. That afternoon, she slipped into the museum's microfilm archives. So if Harper wanted to play politics, she would arm herself with proofs so overwhelming that no one could dismiss her. She scanned through decades-old expedition journals, searching for anything mentioning the Serpent of the Dawn. Finally, buried in a 1973 anthropological survey, she found it, a brief note about a ridge in the eastern highlands, where local elders spoke of a stone gate that only revealed itself when the first light of the solstice touched it. No photos, no follow-up, just a mystery that had slept for half a century. She copied the record, her fingers trembling. Harper could twist stories, but he couldn't rewrite this. The next day, as she was heading to lunch, she overheard Harper speaking to a board member near the exhibit hall. "Yes, the tablet's a fascinating find," he was saying, his voice full of false modesty. "Once I complete my analysis, I suspect it could point to a significant site. Early Mayan, maybe pre-classic. We'll need funding for an expedition." Elena's jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. An expedition, his expedition, built on her work. That evening, she sat in her apartment surrounded by printed maps, satellite images, and the copied journal entry. Her resolve hardened into something sharper. If Harper wanted an expedition, fine, but she would get there first. The plan began to form quickly. She had friends in Guatemala, people she could trust, to arrange discreet transport into the highlands. A guide she'd known since childhood could lead her through the jungle without leaving a trace. And if she moved fast, she could reach the site before Harper's paperwork even left his desk. But moving fast came with risks, legal, professional, even personal. If she was caught, she'd lose her position at the museum, maybe even face charges. Still, as she studied the image of the ridge, its serpentine shadow stretching toward the rising sun, she felt the same thrill she had as a little girl. Sneaking into her grandfather's study to look at the forbidden book. This wasn't just about the temple anymore. It was about proving, once and for all, that her quiet voice carried as much weight as Harper's booming authority. And if she had to break every unspoken rule of the museum world to do it, she would. Elena moved quickly in the days that followed, her every action wrapped in careful secrecy. During museum hours, she appeared absorbed in routine archival tasks, cataloguing a shipment of pottery shards, logging condition reports, but each evening she slipped away to plan the journey. Her first call was to Miguel, an old friend from her childhood village. He was a guide now, known for leading expeditions through the most treacherous parts of the Guatemalan highlands. "You remember the ridge they call La Serpiente del Amanecer?" she asked, in a low voice over the phone. Miguel chuckled. "Of course. My grandfather used to scare us with stories about it. Said it was cursed." "Not cursed," she said. "Guarded." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted. "You're not just sightseeing, are you?" "No," she admitted, "and I need you to take me there. Quietly." Within 2 days, she had booked a flight under her middle name, arranged for transport from the capital, and packed only what she could carry: a weatherproof notebook, camera, climbing gear, and the most essential tool of all, the printed photographs of the tablet's glyphs. Meanwhile, Harper was tightening his grip on the tablet. He kept it in his office now, locked in a display case behind his desk. Elena made a point of passing by once, peering in as though in casual interest. "Still working on your interpretation?" she asked lightly. "Indeed," he said, barely looking up from his computer. "These things take time, Vargas. The subtleties aren't for the untrained eye." She forced a polite smile, masking the knowledge that in less than a week she would be standing where the tablet's story ended. Her departure was uneventful. No one at the museum knew she was gone, and her out-of-office email simply read, "Conducting field research, limited availability." By the time her plane landed in Guatemala City, she felt the shift in the air, the humid warmth, the smell of diesel and street food mingling in the breeze. Miguel was waiting at the curb in a battered jeep. "Still the same," he said with a grin, taking her bag. "You never tell me the whole story." "Some stories aren't ready to be told," she replied, sliding into the passenger seat. They drove east for hours, the city giving way to rolling hills, then dense jungle that pressed close to the narrow road. At a small village, they stopped for supplies: water, dried meat, machetes, and Miguel hired 2 locals he trusted to join them. "The ridge is days away on foot," he reminded her, "and the jungle doesn't forgive mistakes." That night they camped at the edge of the forest, the darkness alive with the calls of unseen creatures. Elena lay awake, the images of the glyphs swimming in her mind. Every curve of the serpent, every marker of the sun's path seemed to pulse with urgency. At dawn they set off, machetes slicing through thick undergrowth. Hours blurred into days. They waded through rivers, climbed steep ridges, and pushed through tangles of vines that clawed at their clothing. Each evening, Elena compared their progress to the map she'd reconstructed from the tablet, adjusting their course by stars and terrain. On the 4th morning, they reached a high plateau. There, spread before them, was the ridge, its undulating form unmistakably serpentine, the head-shaped peak facing the east. As the first rays of the sun spilled over the horizon, they illuminated a shadowed cleft in the rock, a narrow, perfectly vertical opening. Eleanor's breath caught. The gate. She turned to Miguel, her voice a whisper. "We found it!" The cleft in the ridge was narrower than it had appeared from a distance, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. From outside, it looked like a natural crack in the rock, but as Elena stepped closer, her fingers found the edges, too straight, too deliberate. Stone blocks worn by centuries formed a vertical seam that had been hidden from the untrained eye. Miguel and the 2 porters exchanged uneasy glances. "This place is old," one of them murmured in Spanish, "older than the stories." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. She brushed away moss and lichen, revealing faint carvings, more glyphs, similar to those on the tablet. The serpent appeared again, coiled protectively around a sun disk. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "The temple of the Sky Serpent." They squeezed through the narrow opening, the cool, damp air inside carrying the scent of earth and stone. The passage was steep, forcing them to descend into darkness. Miguel lit a torch, the flickering light revealing walls covered in painted murals, scenes of celestial alignments, serpent deities, and human figures offering jade and maize. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Pillars carved with intertwining snakes rose toward a ceiling lost in shadows. In the center, A stone altar stood beneath a shaft of light filtering through a small hole high above. The beam landed perfectly on a carved relief, an open-mouthed serpent swallowing the sun. Elena stepped forward, running her fingers over the carving. This was no simple ceremonial space. It was an astronomical instrument designed to track the solstice. The glyphs around the altar told of a people who believed the serpent guarded a gateway to the sky, a bridge between worlds where only the chosen could pass. Her mind spun with the implications. This site wasn't just a temple. It was a fusion of religion, astronomy, and power. If authenticated, it would be one of the most significant Mayan discoveries in decades. A sound echoed from the passage behind them, footsteps hurried and deliberate. Miguel tensed, gripping his machete. From the shadows emerged a figure in khaki field clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. The smug curve of his mouth made Elena's stomach drop. "Vargas," Dr. Harper said smoothly, his eyes sweeping the chamber. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." "How?" she began, but the answer was already forming in her mind. He must have tracked her travel records or perhaps bribed someone at the airport. "You didn't really think you could keep this to yourself, did you?" Harper circled the altar, his voice echoing off the stone. "An archivist stumbling onto a find of this magnitude, it would be a crime to let you fumble it." Her anger flared. "I didn't fumble it. I found it. You dismissed the tablet as fake." He smiled without shame. "And now I'll make sure it's recorded properly. Don't worry, I'll give you a mention in the acknowledgements." The porters shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Miguel stepped between them. "This isn't your discovery," he told Harper, his tone low but dangerous. Harper's gaze slid past him to the altar. "History belongs to those who bring it to the world, not those who trip over it by accident." Elena met his eyes. "Then let's see whose name history remembers." The beam of light shifted as the sun rose higher, bathing the altar in gold. It was as if the temple itself was watching, waiting to see how this confrontation would end. 2 weeks later, the temple of the Sky Serpent was no longer a secret. News outlets around the world were buzzing with headlines: "Mayan astronomical temple unearthed in Guatemalan highlands." Photographs of the serpent-carved altar and its solstice alignment appeared in magazines, academic journals, and television segments. But what the headlines didn't reveal was the quiet war that had raged in the days after its discovery. Harper had tried to take control from the moment they returned to civilization. He'd filed preliminary reports under his name, framed interviews to suggest the find was a product of his expertise, and made veiled threats about Elena's unauthorized field activity. What he hadn't counted on was the meticulous trail Elena had prepared. Every photograph of the tablet, every page of her translation notes, every cross-reference to old expedition journals, every email confirming her travel arrangements made before Harper ever mentioned an expedition. When the Guatemalan Ministry of Culture convened to determine the rightful lead on the excavation, Elena presented her evidence calmly, point by point. Harper's charm faltered under the weight of her documentation. By the end of the hearing, the decision was unanimous. She would be named the site's principal researcher, with the museum listed only as a supporting institution. The press conference announcing the decision was small but decisive. Cameras flashed as she spoke, not about herself, but about the team, Miguel, the porters, and the local historians who would help ensure the site was preserved with respect for the descendants of those who built it. Harper stood at the back, his smile stiff, his applause perfunctory. His reputation had taken a blow from which he might never fully recover. Whispers in the academic community had already begun to circle, questioning his ethics. Weeks later, Elena returned to the ridge. The excavation team was still in the early stages of mapping the temple, carefully documenting each mural and carving. She stood at the narrow cleft where she had first stepped into the darkness, the jungle's breath warm against her skin. Miguel joined her, holding 2 mugs of strong coffee. "Never thought I'd see this place in the daylight," he said. "Neither did I," she replied, taking a sip. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching sunlight pour over the serpent-shaped ridge. Elena felt the weight of the moment, not just the vindication, but the connection to something far greater than her own victory. Her grandfather's voice seemed to rise from the rustling leaves, only the patient and the worthy. She thought about Harper, not with bitterness, but with a strange pity. He had been so focused on claiming the discovery that he'd missed the deeper truth. Some treasures aren't meant to be owned, only understood. Turning to Miguel, she said quietly, "It's not just about finding it, it's about what we do with it now." He nodded. "And you're the right one to decide." She smiled faintly, letting her gaze drift back to the ridge. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. As the excavation team's voices carried on the wind, Elena felt something lift from her. Years of being underestimated, dismissed, and overshadowed. The temple would stand long after they were gone, a testament to the people who built it and to the quiet archivist who listened when it whispered. And that, she thought, was the real victory.